This program is brought to you by Grand Valley State University.
It's a pleasure for me to be here. Clearly, I feel like Grand Valley is a second home. I was asked to speak to a class on Monday night, and then someone just sent an invitation today to come next semester, so I somewhat feel as though I get a nice parking spot every time I come here, so I'm pretty happy about that. But, you know, any opportunity that I have to talk about clearly the Grand Rapids Public Schools is I think, an opportunity that shouldn't be missed. I've only been here since July of 2006, and I've thoroughly enjoyed my experience here because this is so markedly different from my first experience as superintendent in Kansas City, Missouri. And I want to give you, since this is about leadership, I want to give you a sense of how you never know how prepared you are for leadership responsibilities until circumstances manifest themselves that you either rise to the occasion or you don't. I was not selected through an ordinary vetting process when I became superintendent in Kansas City. Actually, I was walking down the hall about 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, and no, it was a Monday morning, and the board president said, you, come here for a minute. I said, okay, what does the board president want from me? And she said, well, the superintendent, my predecessor, had just called a press conference, and he and the entire senior staff, the legal counsel for the district, the technology officer, chief of staff, chief academic officer, everybody but the business, our CFO. Everybody resigned en masse. They all left. You know, they packed their stuff and they left. Okay, so, and Kansas City, the district at that time was unaccredited, meaning that the state could take the school district over and take over the operation of the school district. So I think this resignation was designed to trigger that type of action on the part of either the state legislature or the State Department of Education. So the board president asked me, now I'd only been in Kansas City for 8 months. I started working there in August of 2000. I had, previous to that, I'd been an administrator in the Pittsburgh Public Schools, and the person who supervised me there became the deputy superintendent in Kansas City and said, well, would you mind coming and being part of my leadership team? And I hadn't particularly thought about moving to Kansas City, Missouri, but I said, okay, this might be a good opportunity for advancement. And you know, you always tell yourself, you can always go back, but you can't always move forward. So, you know, I rationalized this. I said, it's Kansas City, Missouri, and I had a picture of Kansas City that it was like a cow town, and I said, I didn't see myself really living like that, but I said, okay, it could be an adventure. All right. So anyway, moved there, lock, stock, and barrel, packed up everything, moved there, and within 2 months, he left. So mind you, now this is the only person that I knew. Okay, so I get there in August, in October he leaves. Okay, so I'm saying, all right, well this is fine. You know, this is, you know, you'll be okay. You know, you're not here. I wasn't working for him. I mean, I was part of a team. So I said, well, we'll figure this out. But I started to think, this may not be the right opportunity for me. So I was doing what I needed to do to figure out my exit strategy. So in April of 2001, all this transpires. So I'd only been there from August to April. And they said, well, we want you to be the interim superintendent. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I understand what interim means. And that's fine, you know, because they really did have to stave off this takeover attempt. So on the second day that I was in office, I'm going to Jefferson City, which is obviously the state capital of Missouri, to meet with the governor and the leadership of both the House and the Senate to calm the water, so to speak, and show that I can walk and chew gum at the same time, and that, yes, this is one of the most troubled school districts in the country, and I've never been a superintendent. I'm 8 months removed from being principal of an elementary school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I maybe handled a $2.5 million budget, and now we have close to, what, a $350 million budget. And so I had to go and kind of convince these people that I could pull this off. So The only thing I remember about that, besides being extremely nervous about it, is that I said, well, at least watch the landmarks, because I wanted to make sure that what I saw going, I saw coming back, because then I knew I didn't mess up anything, so they weren't going to pull me off and do something to me and leave my body in a ditch on the side of the road. So we were able to do that. We were able to do that. And I was given a 16-month contract, and basically had 16 months to turn the situation around, or the state would have taken over the school district. So 16 months of on-the-job doing. I didn't have on-the-job training. I want you to know that. I had on-the-job doing. I learned a lot about the legal profession. I worked more with lawyers than I worked with anyone else, because also during this time the district was still involved in one of the longest running desegregation cases in the nation's history. So it was not unitary. So that was also part of this backdrop as well. Complying with the mandates of the federal courts, staving off a state takeover, and at the same time trying to figure out what to do to improve student achievement. And so I'm telling all this to get you to understand that you never know what it is that you can actually do until you actually have to do it. Did I do everything right in that job? No. But even I have to, in reflecting on it, and I think that's one of the lessons that I learned about this too, is that when you're in the midst of working in a crisis situation and you're resolving crises, you don't have the opportunity really to reflect on, okay, what is actually going on here? What do I need to do better? What relationships do I need to cultivate differently? How do you move from working in a crisis mindset? Because leadership in those kinds of situations is very, very different. Because there's a degree of, yes, we have to build community, we have to build relationships, we have to build communication, but there's also an element of building compliance. Because those were very prescribed times. I had 16 months to get the district to some level of accreditation beyond where it was at, which was being unaccredited. So it was, you must do this. Not, it would be nice. Not, we hope you get there. You will do this, okay? The unitary status piece was the school board at that time adopted a legal position that said it was not going to go into court and, as its position, represent that it did everything practicable to meet the mandates of the federal courts. They were going in to say, no, we met the requirements that you set forward for us to become unitary in the areas where the district was not unitary. And the remaining one, when I became superintendent, was premised on student achievement. So they went in with a deliberate legal strategy that said, we are going to show you that this is not about did we do everything practicable. We can statistically show that we met the court's mandates. So it was get the district provisionally accredited. That happened. Then the next step was to petition the courts for unitary status, and that took about, altogether, I was there for 5.5 years. The first 4.5 were dedicated to those two things. And again, I was helped by some tremendous people, very, very bright. One of the best law firms in the country, Hogan and Hartson, was part of the legal representation team, and if you ever need an attorney, that's the law firm to call. I mean, they're very good. I mean, when John Roberts was being considered for his seat on the Supreme Court, I was watching this program, and one of the attorneys on there was an attorney I worked with, Pat Brandon. And so you're watching television, and she's talking about the next Supreme Court justice. I said, well, that somewhat makes sense to me. The last cycle that I was there, now, after going through all that, I knew the board in Kansas City is a very different animal, very different than the board we have here, because they were 9 individuals. They had 9 very different views of what education should be. And what I didn't take the time to do once we got through the crises was actually sit down with them and say, okay, now we need to regroup, reorganize, reorient our thinking to how do we work in a non-crisis-like environment. Yes, we have challenges, but they have to be addressed, but they're not challenges that threaten the day-to-day survival of the school district. And that was something that I neglected to do. But also the history of that district is that they had 20 superintendents over a 30-year period. So my tenure was the longest that they've had in 20 years. When I got to, you have to be there for 5 years to get vested. So I got a note from the retirement office, and they said everybody was kind of laughing because they didn't know what to do because no one had gotten to this point in a long time. And I said, ha ha ha, I thought that was really funny, but that was the backdrop too. And you know, there was always this backdrop of, well, you know, how long are you really going to be here? Because eventually they're going to get rid of you and all that kind of stuff. And for me, this was the first position I was in like that, where it didn't rest on what you did. It didn't rest on how good you were at what you did, or did you meet the performance objectives that they set out for you, those types of things. The job that I have really rests on personality. Technical competence is important, but I have to keep 5 people happy. Now my goal is to keep 9 people happy. I want to increase my odds, but the goal is to keep 5 people happy. But you never know what motivates or influences any of those people at any given time. So the new thing for me was to come to the realization that it didn't matter what I did in the job, good, bad, or indifferent. If 5 of them just decide that it's time for you to go, it's time for you to go. Well, that's a whole different kind of mentality too, either, because you have no security. And I think that's one of the tests of leadership too. Well, how do you plan a life like that, where you really have no, and I don't, now people say, well, you have a contract, and trust me, if you want to have some degree of security, get a good attorney, because they can assure you for a little while that you know, until your next endeavor, that, you know, you'll be able to feed your family and things like that. But that's a whole different orientation too. Well, you know, how do you go from believing that it's really about the quality of performance that will determine your success to it's not that, it really is the quality of how you can keep people happy. So there's a political dynamic to the role that I have that you're never prepared for. There is no coursework that I took both as an undergraduate or graduate student that prepared me for the type of scrutiny that this type of work entails. I mean, I don't think that what I do, I mean, I think it's a responsible job, but in comparison to, I didn't get elected to this. But I would dare say that I probably get more, or this position gets more attention than the mayor's office does, which is crazy to me. I mean, this is the mayor of the city. I mean, but there is a dedicated reporter to the Grand Rapids Public Schools. Which, and I wonder about that, because I'm thinking the same level of scrutiny really should accrue to all my other 19 colleagues here in Kent County. But if I were to ask you to name 5 superintendents here, could you do that? Now, doesn't that make you wonder? If I were to ask you, the ISD superintendent has a larger budget than I think Grand Rapids does, but does anybody know who he is? So it's one of those things that it makes you wonder why we get so much scrutiny, this role gets so much scrutiny, and everybody else kind of gets to kind of dance around the margins or dance on the edges. It's one of those things that makes you wonder. So when we decided to part company, because I did go through a professional divorce, and it was amicable too. It was really cool, because, you know, they non-renewed my contract, but said, but we want you to stay to the end of your term. And I said, well, what? You know, I'm thinking, now everybody else you bought out, me, you want me to stay to the end of my term. I said, okay. And then I realized, well, they needed time to figure out what their next move was going to be. Now, it wasn't like things were bad. I mean, we were actually, I had earned every performance incentive they had in my contract. I mean, I got bonuses every year I was there. The public was satisfied. Everybody was happy. The only decision that I got involved in that created some controversy, which made people mad, was we needed to close buildings. But there were no buildings proposed to be closed. We were going to collapse programs, like-minded programs. We had 3 Montessori schools. We were going to put them on a Montessori campus. And the campus was in fact, the newest set of schools the district had. And it wasn't that people objected to the plan. They just didn't like the fact that I proposed it. So, but I had been there a long time. They didn't select me. And then I made well, I don't know if it was a mistake, but I applied for another job. The superintendency in Pittsburgh became open. My parents asked me to apply. They said, well, you could be closer to home. I said, I really didn't want to be superintendent in Pittsburgh, but I said, okay, well, I did it, and I knew I wasn't going to get that job. My brother's on the school board there, so I knew I wasn't going to get that job, but I did it just to placate my folks. And I think they got mad about that, because they said, part of that was, how dare you want to leave us before we want you to leave? So in any event, they decided to go in a different direction. They asked me to stay for the whole year, and I said, no, you realize I'm going to be looking for another job while I'm doing this? And they said, that's fine. They threw me a nice going away party at the end. The Board of Education did. I said, is this the craziest thing you ever heard of? You ask somebody to leave, but throw them apart. And it was a very nice reception. I had so many going away parties that finally I had to tell people, look, I don't need to do this again. You only say goodbye. Well, I'm not dying here. I'm just so anyway, the lesson that I learned in that experience is, one, again, you never know what you're prepared to do. Am I grateful for that experience? Certainly I am. It's been life-changing. It really has been. I'm not saying that I wouldn't be in this type of role, but certainly at the time when that happened, I did not envision that being the case. I probably didn't know what skills I actually had until they were put into effect. But I've always worked in challenging situations. I only had one job that was easy. But it was difficult because when you work in a school where the kids are really motivated and bright and everything, the parents can be a little overbearing. So I much prefer working in challenging situations where people like to be nurtured and cajoled and things like that, as opposed to working in places where everybody knows everything. So I'm a little better in these kinds of situations. So, but the kids were wonderful, the teachers were wonderful. But out of it, I've been doing this for about 18 years, so I've only had like a year and a half that I could say was easy. But the rest have been in what people classify as difficult or challenging. People tell me all the time, oh, I feel so sorry for you. And I'm like, why do you feel sorry for me? Well, it must be so difficult. Not really. It's a job. There are days that go better than others. There are problems. We were talking about the challenges. The number one challenge Grand Rapids faces is not around student achievement, although that needs to obviously ratchet up. The biggest issue we face is a financial one. I am at a point now where I really don't know. We're at a tipping point financially. This is a perfect storm, because there's nothing left to cut. And anything you cut now will do damage to the whole. So the leadership problem is how there is a sense of urgency created around what does this mean to the quality of life of this community if you take one of the largest employers and let it wither on the vine. We're in the process now of engaging the public in a discussion about what our high school should look like. And if you read today's paper, there was one person. Now, if you read the byline, you would have thought there were hundreds of people saying this. There was one person who said, we need to figure out what the high school should be academically before we talk about new facilities.
That was the tagline.
Yeah, I was at that meeting. I'm thinking, okay. And I talked to that gentleman. And his question was addressed. Because he's a former teacher, and his notion is that kids have to be more accountable for their own results. Well, I said to him, sir, to the best of my knowledge, a student is just that. They're learning how to do something. The accountability is that we create for them around learning is a function of what those who instruct children help them to recognize why something is important. I don't think all of you are here because it has been instilled in you that in order for you to get from point A to point B, this is part of that process, okay? So, you know, I know you're all here because you want to be more learned and you definitely have an interest in what it is you're studying, and you are here, you know, for the pure educational aspects of it, but you're also here for a practical reason. You know that in order to be successful, you have to have this credential. Because nobody audits classes here for 4 years. So you want to get a terminal degree, so, you know, we know that there's a practical aspect to this too. We'll try to explain that to somebody in the 5th grade or the 10th grade. So, you know, I think that, again, our challenge here, the leadership challenge here, is to help people understand context. Many of the people who live in Grand Rapids do not have children in the Grand Rapids public schools. Okay. And these schools are markedly different than they looked 5, 10, 15, and certainly 20 years ago. So it's trying to help people dispel notions that may have no basis of fact, but may emanate from the fact of who it is that we serve. The other piece to this is that, you know, this is not a reclamation project. I was having this conversation earlier here too. I didn't take this job because quite frankly, I wasn't looking for another Kansas City-like environment. This is not a reclamation project. It has challenges, but they can be addressed and overcome. I firmly believe that. I firmly believe that. There isn't even, this is even a question of will. I think we have enough people, regardless of what level they're working, teacher, administrator, whatever you want to say. I think we have enough people who can move the work forward. I think that there needs to be a more systematic way to do that, and we've looked at how to do that and looked at processes that we need to routinize across each building so that there's a common nomenclature about what we want a learning experience to be, what it should look like, so that it's much more transparent, you know, because a lot of times everybody wants to operate as a free agent in the school. Well, it can't work like that, because the need to ensure that everybody is making progress has to be filtered in a way where you can go in and make those kinds of comparisons. So, but I think we know how to do that. I think the other thing too is that in spite of the fact that many people don't educate their children in the Grand Rapids public schools, there still is a baseline level of support for the schools. I think there's call it what you will. If it's goodwill, great. If it's pragmatism 101, great. But whatever it is, at least there's a baseline recognition that if you let this fail, it will affect the larger whole. So whatever the basis for that is, I think it's refreshing in a community that people are at least that knowledgeable about what all this means to the larger whole. Because it's clearly not true in Kansas City. They haven't passed a voter-approved bond increase or millage increase in 40 years, over 40 years now. Mm-hmm. Because when I was there, they hadn't done it, well, 40 years, so I've been gone for a year and a half, so now it's 42, 43 years. Any new revenue that they get has either been done by court order or increases from the state. But voters going to the ballot box and approving new resources for the school district hasn't happened in over 40 years, 40 plus. So to come here and to see that that isn't an issue, I said, well, this is very, very different, just on that account alone. My leadership experiences have taught me that you lead people by giving them the latitude to get the job done. You support what they need to do. You give guidance. But in the end, you have to entrust the responsibilities of the position to the people that you hire to do it. I don't look over people's shoulders. And especially those who are on my direct staff, I tell them, if you're sitting at the big table, if you've gotten elevated from the small card table at the family dinner to the big table, I mean, we had a situation where there was an incident in one of the schools, and I watched 3 people on my staff jump up. They literally jumped up out of their seats and they start rushing around trying to figure out what to do. So I looked at 2 of them and I said, two of you need to sit down. Two of you need to sit down. Because I said, I don't need $300,000 running around to solve this problem. One of you is going to solve it. The other two will sit down, and he will tell you how he solved it. So, because I have things I need to get done. I think they're a little taken aback by that sometimes. We had another conversation where I sat and listened very dutifully to this wonderful plan that they were laying out about. We had a situation where a student had brought a weapon to school, and while that was contained, we thought that there may be some residual things at one of the basketball games in the evening. And so I listened to them lay out this plan, and I had said that there was something that I wanted done as part of this, and they omitted it. So I listened, and I said, well, what about what I asked you to do? They said, well, we don't think that's necessary. I said, oh, okay, fine. Now, I'm not one to say, oh, no, you will do that. Oh, no, I won't do that. All I asked is this question. I said, I will certainly support what it is you want to do. However, I just need to know one thing. Who here wants to put their job on the line if this plan doesn't work? Because somebody is going to definitely accept responsibility for it since you've decided that this step wasn't necessary. All I want to know is who wants to put their job on the line if your decision to move forward with this plan doesn't work. Now this was women are much more pragmatic in these conversations, and most of my staff is female, so I enjoy, I really, and I do have a bias, but I do enjoy working with women because they're very pragmatic. I work with a pride of lionesses. Now I have watched these women dismember people very, very politely and professionally. But it saves me a lot of grief because I just get this wide-eyed look and say, oh, you shouldn't have done that. Because they are it's like I watch the Animal Planet, and those programs fascinate me about lions and lionesses because these women are so reminiscent of that I said, my gosh, I said, that's why they behave like that. But men are everybody wants to be real macho. Everybody's like, what do you mean? Just what I said. I mean, who wants to put their job on the line in case this decision doesn't work out? Everybody got real quiet. I said, well, since y'all got quiet, now let me explain to you. I'm supporting your decision, but you're all gonna put your job on the line if this doesn't work out. That worked out. And they all came to me like kids with an A on a, when a kid gets a gold star. It worked. Good for you. Good for you. I'm glad it did. But you have to understand, my responsibility, I am not telling professionals what to do. That's not my role. That's not my role. We have picked learned people. We have picked professionals. We've picked competent. We've picked child-centered people to be in the key leadership roles. So I don't feel that I should have to tell anybody what to do. The other thing is I don't have all the answers. I don't. My staff, and the other thing too, my staff was here. I asked a few people to move here, and they said it was too cold here. And two people I really wanted to come. They both said, well, they had other extenuating circumstances, but they said it was just too cold to move to Grand Rapids. Come on, we live in Kansas City, where there is now an ice storm. So, I think it's funny when they call and ask how the weather is. I said, oh, it's kind of sunny and it's not too bad here. What about you? I don't have electricity. Oh, see, if you'd moved here, you wouldn't have that problem. But, again, I really do believe that if you give people the latitude to figure something out, but you also give them the expectations. You also say, look, this is what we have to get done. When I was a principal of a school, I was very blessed both times. I worked with some of the best people, regardless of role, that I probably will ever work with. And that was from the custodian to the secretary to the teachers, whoever it was. I was very, very lucky. Now, the one school, I got to pick everybody, but I was in a situation where nobody really wanted to come there to work. So, when you get to kind of pick and choose people, but, you're picking choosing people who really need a job, okay? But the beauty in that was I laid out for them, look, this is what we have to do. I told them it's not going to be easy. I like to think I'm easy to work with, but others sometimes have a different view of that. Because I've been told I'm too demanding. Well, but children are involved. How can you not be demanding when children are involved? Now, if this were just any old other kind of work, maybe it'd be different, but somebody's child needs to be educated here. And I take it that, I look at those children as being my children. And who isn't demanding about what they want for their own children? Who isn't? And the other thing too is we get paid to do this. This isn't volunteer work. So, but my thing is this is what we have to get done. I'm amenable to any way that you want to do to get it done, so long as we get the desired outcome. But it's also about support, and support has to be continuous, and it's not just the pat on the back, the good job thing. That's part of it. But it's making sure that people have the tools that they need to do the job and the professional development support that they need to do the job too. Because this is not easy work. It really isn't. Teaching today is not easy. And if anybody says that it is, I'd have to beg to differ. Because children today are very different in terms of how they learn, in terms of their motivation, what motivates them, expectations. Expectations that we have for them, expectations that they have for themselves, the community pressures, all those types of things. I would not want to be a student today. Certainly not in high school. They just have too much to deal with. It's an exciting time. I mean, everything is at their feet, but it's what it takes to get to that point that it's just too much for me. Well, I guess everybody says that when they're growing up too, because it was probably too much then too. But I guess my point is that it takes a different type of mindset to work with today's child or today's youth. But I think we have enough of it. Are there challenges? The biggest challenges we face too around how we work with students is I do think that there is there's a difference in terms of how issues like social distance, this whole notion of cultural understanding. I think that people have forgotten that school is a negotiated process. School success, children who are successful in school have figured out how to negotiate the process of school. They have figured out demeanor. They've figured out communication. They figured out the politics of how to negotiate in a school environment. And if you have parents who can help you figure that out, then children, by and large, will be successful. Because when they're little, they have to learn the politics of compliance. And and we're afraid to talk about this kind of stuff. But let's face it. A kid who goes to school and who is trained to sit and listen first. Now, it's not, I didn't say not trained to sit, listen, and later question. But even that can get you in trouble if you question too much. But we have to help children figure out that process. And people automatically assume, well, everybody knows how to do this. No, they don't. No, they don't. And I think by and large, because of, certainly in our demographic, the age of our parents, some of them, the age of their grandparents, there's a gap in how people learn about this process of school. So that's issue one. Issue two is that there is a level of social distance that exists between the students and those who work with them. And what I mean by that is it doesn't matter where you live. I don't really care where people live. However, I knew what I had to do to better relate to the students that I worked with. I never lived in close proximity to any group of students that I worked with. I mean, that was just how it was. However, I had to make sure that I knew what was going on, where they lived, and where they came from. So there were things that I had to do. Can we negotiate that contractually? Yeah, I guess we could. But the fact of the matter is that we shouldn't have to, because any industry that is successful, that rests on the perception of the client, knows what it has to do in order to engage the client. I mean, why do people want to stay at the Amway? Because they know how to market that. They know how to make people want to come back. And they do know how to make people want to come back. They're really good at what they do. But it's the same thing with schools. But oftentimes, people who work in schools believe that, well, they have to come to us anyway. Well, no, they don't. No, they don't. So we've got to do a better job, and certainly I have to do a better job of helping people understand that school is a negotiated process of expectations. And when one party isn't knowledgeable about how to maneuver in that process, we have to figure out who's going to help fill that breach. And I think we have to spend a lot more time in schools of education talking not just about pedagogy, but about process. Because I think we don't spend enough time talking about that. Again, as I look at what's going on here in Grand Rapids, I think if we can figure out that piece about relationships and the process of schooling, I think that we can move forward in a mighty way. But I think the only thing that really will stop us is us, quite frankly. And getting people to understand that there's more to this than, you know, how kids do on the MEP or the Michigan Merit exam. So, am I optimistic about the future here? Yes, I am. Probably more so this year than I maybe was when I first started, but in terms of why I feel that way, obviously I work with a board that's very supportive, which makes a big, big difference. But that is an all-consuming relationship. There are 9 of them. I meet with each board member once a month individually, and it's their choice of how we do it. So I meet with some at their home. Some we have breakfast, some we have lunch, some we have dinner. We do school visits. I see them a lot. Is it hard? I like them as people, so that mitigates it somewhat. But have you ever had a relationship with 9 people? Now, and there's no sex involved or anything like that. So, not that I've had sex with 9 people, but that's hard. It's very hard, especially when all 9 of them have very different relationship needs. But nobody teaches you that either. So if there's any lesson that I've learned in this, is that you have to, at all times, be true to yourself. The things you're good at, you're good at. The things you're not good at, you're not good at. So you have to recognize that. The other piece to this is I do think that you have to, and this is a question I have been asking myself, at what point do you recognize that you're paying too high a personal price to be successful in the role? Because this is, it's hard to be on all the time. It's hard to never be able to let your guard down. I think I'm getting better at it, but I never lose sight of the fact that I am the superintendent of schools. I've been in situations, and this usually happens in a store where somebody is really acting like really crazy, or they're talking to you in a way like, why are you talking to me like that? But I can never react like I used to before I was superintendent. So, you know, have a little pithy comment and go get the manager and all that kind of stuff. So now I know how to diffuse those kinds of situations. And you guys, and you know, I questions. I wonder why we can't do this differently or have this conversation. And then everybody gets a little calm and all that kind of stuff. But you know, I never get mad in public anymore. You know, I always try to be calm. You know, people always want to talk. You know, and you're like, okay, I'm sweating like a pig at the Y. I really do not want to talk to you. I look like I'm falling apart here. But you have to do those things. And people are so kind and gracious and that kind of, so I really don't mind. Or, you know, I was on a plane one time and this lady kept saying, I know you. And I'm like, ma'am, I really don't know you. But she said, but I know you. Ma'am, I really don't think I know you. I don't want to be rude, but I just don't know you. Context, tell me where I know you from. I mean, I'm thinking I'm getting ready to serve with some papers or something. She said, I saw you on television. I said, okay. And then she said, I watch you all the time on Channel 27. I said, oh, okay, I know what you're talking about. Okay. Yeah, I guess you do know me. So I mean, the moral of the story, is I'm pretty lucky to be doing what I'm doing. I feel very fortunate to be doing what I'm doing because I enjoy my work. I enjoy the people I work with, and I certainly enjoy the people I work for. That makes a big difference. 2, if there's the only thing that any advice I would give to anybody is don't settle for just you should be happy in what you do. You know, especially people who aspire to leadership roles, because it's responsibility that really drives you. You have a purpose, you have a social good that you want. But you have a right to be happy. And you also have a right to not be abused in the position. Because civility should always be important to you. Insist that people behave civilly towards you. They may hate your guts, but they can, civility is very important to me. And I told the board, I said, please don't hire me if we can't all agree to treat each other with dignity and respect, because I think you have a right I think you're entitled to that. Aspiring to a position of leadership, there's a lot that comes with it. Yes, your life is an open book. Yes, you have to be subject to criticism. Yes, everybody can do the job better than you. No, everybody thinks you're incompetent all the time, you know, all that kind of stuff. But you do have a right to civility and to be treated with a measure of dignity. But I also think more important than all of that is that you should aspire to be happy in what you do. Because a life of service, particularly public service, affects everybody and every relationship you have. And so there are people who will love you and support you in what you're doing, and they have the right to not be impacted negatively because you're not happy in the choice that you made. So you have to make sure that you're deriving some sense of joy from this work so it doesn't adversely affect the meaningful relationships you have in your personal life. And I think far too many people get involved in work like this and don't take stock and don't assess what this means mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And I have made a pact with myself that the moment this work starts to affect me in a negative way in those areas is the moment I need to do something different. Because ultimately, if I'm not good with me, I really can't do anything good for anybody else. So, but I'm really having a heck of a good time. So, and I think it shows with those that I interact with, because probably more so than I was in Kansas City, because on Kansas City I was on pins and needles all the time. But here there's an ease and a calmness that even surprises me sometimes. I'm just not kind of pressed about this anymore. I'm kind of like, I'm going to do the best I can. And in the end, if that proves not to be good enough, then it wasn't the best I could, then people, that may not be that I did my best here, but there may be somewhere else where I can do my best. So the work is there, and I just want to have the opportunity to do it. So I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad that we had the time to talk, and I didn't bore anybody to death. Everybody stayed awake, so I'm really happy. You know, anytime you talk to people at lunchtime, you're like, oh gosh, you know, please don't let anybody fall asleep. But questions, you know, is that what I should do now?
First of all, thank you.
You know, thanks. I feel so uncomfortable when people clap because I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do. But I appreciate that. I do. So, yes, sir.
I have a question. Yeah, you talked a little bit about your relationship with the board, and it's 9 different people, and it's complicated. But your job is complicated too, in that you have to keep principals and teachers happy. You have to keep parents and the public happy. You have to keep the state and Washington happy. How do you deal with all the politics of it? And second, how do you get beyond the politics and deal with the actual issues that you know you need to deal with?
I think you deal with politics by having very well-defined process and protocols. And people sometimes get really bothered by that. We had a situation where I've spent a lot of time making sure that people understand the importance of being on message and why that's important. So we basically sent out media advisory that said there are only 2 designated spokespersons for the district. And if you're not one of those 2 people, you need to anytime you are speaking in your capacity as a district employee, regardless of what you do, you must get that cleared through our communication director's office. Well, I got this email that said, you're infringing upon my First Amendment rights. No. And so I went to great lengths to explain. In your capacity as a district employee, there's a process, there's a protocol that we expect everyone to follow. Now, when you are on your own time and on your own dime, you can say whatever you want to say. But, you know, if you are speaking in your capacity as a district employee about a district policy or procedure, this is the protocol you must follow. Well, you know, obviously, you know, you have to spend a lot of time helping people understand why protocol and process is important. But I think you mitigate the politics of it is always going to be the politics of it, okay? But the politics of it is, I need 5 votes at a minimum to get anything done. I'm glad I don't have to play politics like that too often. But part of building the relationship with the board and to minimize the political influence is to make sure they understand the direction that the administration is going in, but that direction really emanates from what they have set out as what they want to see, what they want to have accomplished. So, you know, part of this also is to make sure that what I'm doing is consistent with what they have said they want to see. We had a meeting this morning about our facilities piece to go over let's make sure that we're all clear on the process, because what I like them to do is to make sure that issues that are brought before them are consistent with the process by which we laid out for them in terms of what we said we were going to do. So if we come with a recommendation, and the question that I always ask them to ask me is this consistent with what you've told us you have been doing or you're going to do? And since I can lay all that out, their point is that we understand that there's a defined way by which we do things, and they can always rely back to the fact, well, you said you were going to do this, but your recommendation isn't consistent with that. The other thing, too, is that this is the key lesson that I know is very, very important. Get people's input at the beginning. Don't get it in the middle. Don't get it at the end. Ask people, what do you want? What do you want? And then my job is to show, okay, if we do this, pros and cons, cost benefits, you might have to give this up to get this. But once I present all that, if this is still what you want to do, fine. Because my obligation is to lay out to you consequences or benefits. And ultimately, it's the public's will that really has to influence how we conduct our business. But I think we've been very good about working in that way, because to be perfectly honest, if you look at the board meetings and if you look at the decisions that they've been involved in, they don't get mired down in very, very contentious issues. I mean, they don't. And many of the things that emanate from the media, if you really think about them, they're like, no, they're not really even that serious. But I think that's how you do it. I think it's been a good recipe for success here, at least, anyway. Yes?
I'm curious about your background. How did your parents, your family, your schools prepare you to be a leader someday, and also the role of mentors in Pittsburgh or Kansas City? Or
that's a great question. My folks are, wow, my mom and dad, what can I say about them? My parents are really the kind of people, and they're still like this, and it drives me crazy. I always really, and this is especially true, my mother's like, whatever you want to do will make me happy. My mother's, if I wrapped up a rock out here and took it home, she'd say, oh my God, this is the nicest rock anybody's ever taken. So she's no help sometimes, because she's always going to be the voice of calmness, and I'm still going to love you no matter what you do. I always wanted my father to say no. Like, no, that's crazy, don't do that. They're the kind of, they said, if that's what you want to do, that's what you should do. Now, they did say have a plan for how you're going to do it. You know, they weren't like be haphazard and that kind of thing. So I never really had a situation where I didn't have a lot of encouragement to do the things that I wanted to do. Teachers, I had a wonderful experience as a student in the Pittsburgh Public Schools. All along the way, there were teachers who pushed and nurtured, and I really did have people who put me in roles and gave me responsibilities that I could never figure this out either. But when I think back on being in school, I was always put in charge of anything to do with collecting money. If we had to organize any type of fundraising effort, anything where you had to get money out of other kids, I was always put in charge of it. When I was in high school, I was president of my homeroom, and I said, you know, we're going to raise money so that nobody pays to go to the prom. Everybody will go free because we'll raise enough money. But we did that in our junior year. So by the time everybody's a senior, nobody who was in my homeroom had to pay to go to the prom. And they were selling candy left and right, and you know, it was just encouraging people, cajoling people, like, we can do this, we can do this. And then when I became a teacher, I worked for a principal. When you talk about a mentor, I mean, this gentleman was relentless about me going back to school to get a principal certification. I was like, look, I don't feel like going back to school. I just finished graduate school. I don't want to do that again. But he was so relentless about it, I went back to school just so I could keep him quiet. And then, but little by, he said, well, okay, I want you, the two most influential people for me were my cooperating student teacher who, although she did say, are you sure you really want to be a teacher? She encouraged me to get a master's degree in something else. So I got a master's degree in public administration. But her husband was the dean of the school, so they kind of helped me out because I wound up not having to pay anything for it, so that was pretty cool. My dissertation advisor said to me, look, your job is to write this dissertation in the way that I instruct you to do it. My job is to negotiate the process for you. So if you do everything I tell you to do, everything else will be in good order. And it was. My dissertation defense was a half an hour. And two of the members of the committee were late, so it was really about 15 minutes. But all along the way, there have been people who have either pulled me to the side and said, you need to do this better, or not at all, or that's really an opportunity you might want to consider and pursue. So I'm very lucky on that account. I think the most, I've always just been around encouraging people. Be they friends, family, professional. I've never really been around a lot of negative people, so I don't know how to operate like that. But the other thing too is I've always worked in places where people expected very little out of the children that I worked with, and my goal was to always make those children see that that's not how it was going to be. I'm very proud of the work that I did in the Pittsburgh Public Schools. We turned the school around. I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of the work I did in Kansas City. I mean, people call me now and say, we wish you were still here. That's a nice thing to have people say about you. That's a very nice thing to have people say about you. But I hope it's because people genuinely see that I enjoy what I do. I'm actually having fun. I just don't, I look at everything I do as really a privilege to be doing it. Somebody else could be doing this. And I said, boy, I feel very, very fortunate that it's me. So I hope that shows. I hope that my parents instilled in all of us the notion of being grateful. That, what is it? There's a song we sing in church, be grateful. There's always somebody worse off than you. And I really believe that. So I never look at anything like as a problem, because I said there are people who are really going through things, and if the biggest problem you have is a reporter who can't get something right, I'm pretty lucky. So, but I'm glad you asked me that, because I'm pretty lucky. I got in the right line in the parent department. I won't tell you that much. I really did. My parents are cool. My parents are my friends too. So, I love them, but they're my friends. Yes.
Kind of going off of that. Did you ever have that, since you said that you were given a lot of direction and a lot of people have been able to push you and support you along the way, did you ever have like a defining moment where you just knew that this is like exactly what you wanted to do, or?
Yeah, I knew very early in life, as much as I didn't want to admit this, I knew I should be a teacher. Okay. I knew it. I did know. But when I was going to school, everybody was going to be an engineer or an accountant. And engineering didn't really grab me that much. And accounting, I said, that's a little too stale for me. But I knew I needed to do something that involved talking. So I was going to go to law school. And in the back of my mind, I still am thinking about trying to figure out how to do that, because the law does intrigue me. But I got caught up in this. I think once I had the opportunity to do it on a full-time basis, I got caught up in the fact that I really enjoyed what I was doing. And I enjoyed it because I was learning as much as I hope others were learning from me. So this is an evolution. Now, the other thing that I didn't necessarily like to admit, but I know is true, it's much easier to lead the parade than to be afloat in it. So I'm not a good follower. I'm not, and I've never have been. And that's the part that I think, when I think back on things, I wasn't a good follower. I said, the thing for me was, I said, if I want to see something done right, or, well, you know what you mean by right, done my way, then I need to be part of the mix that looks at the decision as to how it should be done. So I was willing to put myself out there. I mean, so, but I just recognize that too. And I think sometimes when you want to be in a leadership role, people are really afraid to say that. People are really afraid to say, no, I don't want to be led, I'd rather lead. Because people think that's arrogant, or people think that's boastful. Or I don't think it's arrogant or boastful at all. But remember, people get very intimidated by people who are confident, or self-assured, or just okay with who they are. People get really bummed out when, you know, I'm not afraid to be wrong, but I'm also not afraid to be right. And I think that people get a little intimidated by that, or get a little turned off by a directness about, no, I'm confident that this is the course that we should take, and I believe that if we take it, we'll get the results that we want to see. I think people get very nervous that you can be that self-assured. And then, of course, people want to see you get off stride too. So, but again, this is newfound for me. Now, I wouldn't have said this when I was in Kansas City, because I was very tentative about my decisions, because I was really trying to keep peace. But I don't have that attitude anymore. Now it's about results. It's about getting things done. And if I have to stir the waters a little bit to get that done, it's okay. Because I've been through, I had to tell myself, what is the worst thing that can happen to you? What is the absolute worst thing that can happen to you if you do your job? Somebody can ask you to leave. Okay, that's fine. You get a good lawyer and a good moving company, and you will survive, trust me. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. And a good realtor, but that's a whole different thing. So, yes. I
have to ask you as a follow-up, since you were not a good follower, were you first in your birth order?
No. No. I had 6 brothers, I'm in the middle.
You're in the middle?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, is the rest of your family also leadership oriented?
We have very different temperaments about a lot of things in my family. One of my brothers is on the school board in Pittsburgh. He got elected to his 4th term. He's in the middle of his 4th term. I'd say he's probably the most focused around leadership. My oldest brother was a commissioned officer in the Army, and his son is a commissioned officer in the Navy. So. And his wife, my sister-in-law, who's really my sister because I've known her since I was in like the 7th grade. She is either the chief lobbyist, or she works for the National Governors Association, so she travels all across the country. So, yeah, I mean, it really is interesting when I look at the dynamics of all of us, how everybody is doing something that in some part they've had leadership responsibilities. Because if you saw the temperament of my folks, you wouldn't. It's really interesting how all this is kind of panned out. It really is. But no, I'm not the oldest.
In your
Last
opinion,
question.
in your opinion, what is the difference between a good leader and a great leader?
A good leader gets things done. A great leader gets things done, but empowers people that when that leader departs the scene, the good things continue and only get better. A great leader cultivates people to be greater leaders. A great leader knows how to cultivate people so that they know how to cultivate others to be great leaders. The test for me is not while I'm here. The test for me is when I'm gone. I take it as high praise when people say, "We wish you would come back." Because, but the goal for me in all of this is always to empower people to take control of their own situation and have the confidence, the skills, and the commitment to take good work and make it better. That's what a great leader does, in my humble opinion.
You're going to see that little quotation on our website.
I hope so.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Grand Valley State University. Visit us at gbsu.edu.